Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this significant webinar hosted by Arab Organization for Human Rights in the UK. Today's title is Bodies of Detainees and Messages of Torture: What is happening inside Israeli prisons? The discussion will address these cases as evidence of a systematic policy of torture and extrajudicial killings carried out by Israeli authorities and will Khulud. Khulud.
Yes, we hear you. We can hear you.
لا لا، أنا سامع الكلام بتاعك كله بيتكرر تاني. أنتوا مش
Okay.
سامعين حاجة خالص؟
لا, we are fine.
So let's شوف نفس الكلام اللي قلته خلود.
حاول تميوت عفوا اقفل الصوت عندك ثواني. Just we have a technical issue. We try to solve it. Okay. Can you try now? Can you try? Nader, can you try? Okay, we have technical issue. We'll try to solve it right now. Nader, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear it. Should I start from the beginning?
Yeah, please.
Yes. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this significant webinar. تفضل. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this significant webinar.
Okay, Nader, we can hear you one voice, no problem with us.
Okay.
I think it's a problem in your laptop or something. So make voice a little low or try to fix it somehow, because you have to start now.
Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the significant webinar hosted by the Arab Organization for Human Rights in the UK, titled Bodies of Detainees and Messages of Torture: What is Happening Inside Israeli Prisons. The discussion will address the cases as evidence of a systematic policy of torture and extrajudicial killings carried out by Israeli authorities and will explore the absence of credible investigation and the entrenched culture of impunity that shields perpetrators from accountability, alongside the failure of the international community to take decisive action. The webinar will also examine the collapse of the health sector in Gaza under the ongoing blockade, which has resulted in widespread deprivation of medical care and essential treatment, reflecting a broader policy of collective punishment against civilians. Today's discussion points is ceasefire, violation, and the ongoing reality of genocide, evidence of systematic torture in Israeli prisons, bodies of detainees as proof of crimes, impunity and the absence of independent investigations, international responsibility, and path to justice. We are honored today to be joined by a distinguished panel of speakers, and we will start off right away, and we give the floor. So let me first explain. Each speaker will have 5 to 7 minutes to present his testimony and insights. After everybody's finished, we will permit each speaker to have something like 2 or 3 minutes for during this to have something like a follow-up on his thoughts. Let's start right away, and we'll give the floor to Mr. Sir Geoffrey Nice, British barrister and former judge. Mr. Geoffrey.
Can you unmute yourself, please?
Mr. Geoffrey, can you unmute yourself?
I was never an international judge. I was only ever a judge a part-time judge in England. And I believe you want me to talk only really about organ harvesting from prisoners. And what I can contribute to your discussion today is built on experience and will probably incline you to caution about that particular allegation. In wars, there are certain allegations that get circulated and repeated, sometimes without any real evidence to back them up. One, for example, is that in conflicts, one side is seen playing football with the decapitated head of somebody from the other side. And it's always impossible, actually, to track down evidence of that happening. It is a rather nasty, made-up war story. And one of the problems with harvesting of organs is that it too has become, from time to time, such a story, so that in the Yugoslav wars, for example, there were 3 sequential wars of importance: Croatia, Bosnia, and Kosovo. And in sequence, the Serbs alleged forced organ harvesting, stealing of organs from prisoners, from Serbs, from their own side, first in Croatia, then in Bosnia, and then in Kosovo. And there was never any evidence, ever any evidence of forced organ harvesting. I have, however, chaired a tribunal into the People's Republic of China some years ago, where it was found, to the level of being certain, satisfied beyond reasonable doubt, that forced organ harvesting of prisoners of conscience, and in particular of Falun Gong practitioners, was proved. The question then is, what sort of evidence is going to be sufficient for you to pursue this, free of the risk of it being shown simply to be a false war story? Now, in the case of China, there was a great deal of evidence of different types, a very limited amount of direct evidence, but quite a lot of evidence of testing of people who disappeared to check, apparently to check whether their organs would be of the right category, the right blood samples, all that sort of stuff, in order to sell the organ on a commercial basis to a known potential buyer of a transplant operation. There was evidence of the mass development of the practice of organ transplantation in China, of hospitals being devoted to the work, of huge amounts of money being made out of it, and so on. And it was only when all the evidence was put together that it was possible to reach the conclusion that we did. And you can see that in the judgment of the China Tribunal, which is available online. At the moment, I've scanned, to the extent possible in the time available, the evidence about forced organ harvesting, stealing of organs in the Israeli prisons, and there is not much evidence. So I think at the moment one should be very cautious. However, if it is the case that cadavers, bodies, on return have been found with their organs cut out, organs of the kind that can be used in transplant operations, so that's liver, kidneys, cornea, hearts, and so on, lungs, then absent another explanation for why this should be done, it's a reasonably good starting point. But you're going to need a great deal more before investing too much time and too much of your reputation in staking this particular allegation. The only alternative explanation for returning bodies minus their organs that I can think of is that the intention is to make people believe that the horrible business of organ harvesting is going on when it hasn't been, a form of mental torture imposed on those who receive the bodies. but I've seen no evidence that that's the explanation either. So my starting point is thank you for inviting me. I'll listen with interest to others, but on this allegation, proceed with care.
Dr. Geoffrey, thank you very much. And now we'll proceed with Dr. Filiz Değer. He's a Turkish lawyer specializing in international humanitarian law. Dr. Filiz, can you unmute yourself?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. You have the floor now.
Okay. Yes, can I start?
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Firstly, I respectfully greet all esteemed participants. I'm attending the seminar from Turkey, and I'm closely following the developments in Gaza. Exactly is October 7. First of all, I'd like to say this on behalf of my country, Turkey, following the declaration of ceasefire in Gaza October 8, 2025. Humanitarian aid operations in Turkey gained new momentum. In this context, 100-truck humanitarian aid convoy coordinated by the Disaster and Emergency Management Presidency, we say AFAD, the Turkish Red Crescent and other Turkish civil society organizations parted from the Egyptian city of Arish and arrived in Gaza via the Kerem Abu Salim border crossing. Thus, since October 7, 2023, total of 100,525,000 of humanitarian aid has been delivered to Gaza. This is the from my country. However, unfortunately, today, Israel Prime Minister Netanyahu's office said that the Rafah border crossing between Gaza and Egypt will remain closed until further notice. While Netanyahu accused Hamas of failing to do enough to recover the bodies of prisoners. And the Gaza government media office reported that the Israel army violated the ceasefire agreement, which took effect at the beginning of October, 47 times, killing 38 Palestinians and injuring 143, unfortunately. The current point reached in the three-stage ceasefire points, as you know, which included firstly the release of hostage, secondly a ceasefire agreement, and thirdly the reconstruction of Gaza has been a disappointment for a permanent ceasefire. Now situation is that the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has not yet made statements on this matter. During the ceasefire, approximately 2,000 people were released from Israel prisons, including approximately 100,000 people abducted from Gaza and held without charge. According to Israel statistics from 2025, 11,056 Palestinians were being held in Israel prisons for Monday's release. At least 3,500 of them were being held in administrative detention without trial. Israel military databases show that only a quarter of those detained in Gaza were classified as criminals. Most of these detainees returned to West Bank were men serving life sentences, and many were accused of violent crimes, including murder and fatal attacks on Israelis. After 7 October, Israel restricted family visits and sentences to them too much harsher. conditions, leaving released prisoners struggling to be recognized by their families. Torture inflicted on detainees continue to escalate. However, today, Palestinian forensic experts are working to identify 120 bodies brought to Gaza by Israel, marked only with numbers. Some of the bodies are blindfolded, have their hands and feet bound, and bear gunshot wounds. It's not yet clear whether the 120 people whose bodies were returned last week died in Israel custody in Gaza during war, or whether they were killed in Israel while participating in the terrorist attack on October 7, 2023. Gaza Health Ministry officials said the body's bones were broken and appeared to have been crushed by heavy vehicles. He released photos of some of the bodies, including close-ups, the footage released to the press. Some clearly show cable ties, blindfolds, and old gunshot wounds. Most of the bodies appear to be young ones, and those who are close appear to be in civilian clothes. An official from Gaza Ministry of Health said that each of the bodies had documentation indicating they were held at the Saiteman military base in the Negev desert, where DNA tests were conducted. The base was used as a detention center by Israel, and numerous cases of ill treatment of Palestinian detainees have been reported during the war in Gaza. The Israeli military has detained thousands of citizens in the Gaza Strip in strict secrecy and subjected them to torture, ill treatment, and forced disappearances. After Hamas seized power in 26, Israel laid siege to the entire population of Gaza, leading to economic devastation, extreme poverty, and imprisonment of 2 million civilians. Policies it's believed would provide space for the maintenance of apartheid and occupation in Gaza. It did everything in its power to maintain separation, political division, and several cultural, economic, and even family ties between Palestinians in the West Bank, Israel, and Gaza. Until October 7, it maintained its policy of keeping violence at a manageable level, ensuring that the Gaza Strip would be treated separately from the rest of Palestine, and that Israel would not be forced to make any significant political decisions regarding Palestine by using its military detainees. Israel, which had used collective punishment in Gaza before October 7, resorted to acts of mass destruction after October 7. An architecture of oppression has been established over the past decade behind the suppression of Palestinian solitary lives, deliberately employed mechanism of oppression, including rhetoric that echoes anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. Ideally, international law is about reciprocity and the protection of all states. However, the current system fails to uphold this principle equally and fairly. Both South Africa and Israel have ratified the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, which imposes an obligation on states to prevent and punish genocide. Article 9 of Genocide Convention explicitly states that any dispute between states that agree to abide by convention must be resolved by International Court of Justice. all states party of Genocide Convention have a common interest in ensuring that the facts of genocide are prevented, that those responsible for them, all of us, for responsible for this situation, should they occur, are not held accountable. The provisions of the Genocide Convention create obligations that can be described as erga omnes partes obligations, meaning that each state party has an interest in this matter. The acts occurring in Gaza are capable of failing within the scope of convention constitute first of its killing, second causing serious bodily and mental harm, thirdly intentional degradation of living conditions leading to the destruction of Palestinians in Gaza, fourth imposition of measures to prevent births given the group. Within the scope of this convention, Genocide Convention, deliberately changing the living conditions of the group calculated to eliminate its physical existence in whole or in part shows that the perpetrator ultimately aims for the death of the group members and includes methods of physical destruction other than murder. Ben
Dr. Filiz,
considers, yes,
Dr. Filiz, regarding this statement and notes, I think it's very significant. And we
yes,
have a time at the end of the webinar. We can continue with this statement, and especially it's very important. And just we give it to leave it to the final comments, so that we can give more time to our participants.
yes. I'd like to say that within the scope of Article 2 Genocide Convention, the deliberate degradation of living conditions, such as creation of conditions that lead to slow death, such as lack of food, water, shelter, clothing, and sanitation, and forced mass displacement of Palestinians and Gaza constitutes means of physical destruction other than killing. Same time, crimes against humanity are defined in Article 7 of Roma Statute, which contains the most comprehensive modern treaty codification following acts. One of them is imprisonment after serious deprivation of physical liberty in violation and fundamental rules of international law. Thank you for listening me. I hope contributed.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fries,
Thank you too.
for your insight. Thank you. And now we move to Dr. Mark Perlmutter. Dr. Mark. Dr. Mark.
Okay, I'm sorry. I had to be unmuted. I can't,
Please.
if you can hear me adequately, I can't
Yes.
speak to the illegal harvest and unethical harvesting of organs, but what I can specifically bear witness to are specific atrocious war crimes that are absolutely in parallel with what has been described above. And let me give example of some of the war crimes. I have taken specific testimony from doctors, nurses, and operating room techs, all of which were abducted from the operating room while they were operating on another human being and taken to Israeli prisons and tortured. One nurse was actually shot in the knee because he refused to abandon a patient while he was still operating on the patient. And then he himself, the nurse, was taken to an Israeli prison where he was tortured, not given any medical care against the Geneva Convention, which Israel was a signatory to in 1950, 2 years after they proclaimed their statehood. And while every Israeli was carrying a passport that said the word Palestine on it. And as did Golda Meir, for 20 years. This person was given one juice box a day, sometimes every other day. He had been set free after 45 days of being blindfolded, was driven after he lost 45 pounds of his body weight, driven to the Israeli border in Khan Yunis, dropped at the border with his open wound draining maggots behind him who infected his wound. A rifle butt was shoved into his right eye, exploding it. And so he crawled to safety for 2 kilometers until somebody picked him up, blinded in his right eye, and his right knee still infected after an Israeli bullet went through it, completely untreated. And he fell into a coma where we found him with bed sores on the back of his ears and the back of his head. He subsequently, as a nurse, had his leg amputated in Egypt after multiple attempts by myself to operate on him to try to save his leg, all of which failed. I have surgeons who were abducted out of the operating room, taken prisoner, all because Israeli soldiers, and he was a prisoner in Israel, all because they claimed that he knew where Hamas soldiers were hiding in the basement of the hospital. And there wasn't even a basement to this hospital. The hospital administrator gave me a tour of it. Only 3-foot high crawl spaces where the air conditioning and electrical and the sewage pipes were running. No room for to even stand up in these tunnels. And this doctor was taken prisoner for 11 months. And he was beat every time he asked to speak to his lawyer. He was beaten 3 times harder if he got to speak to his lawyer. He got his lawyer by whispering into his ear to get his family evacuated to Egypt. He remained in prison, beaten every day. Every one of his fingertips were broken by pliers and crushed. I saw x-rays of his hands. All of his fingertips still had every single one had a broken bone in it that didn't heal. And when he still wouldn't tell them where Hamas was because he couldn't, because he never saw anybody that he could identify as Hamas, and nor could I when I was at the hospital. He then was raped by female IDF soldiers with a zucchini placed up his rectum, and the zucchini was soaked in pork blood. And then they showed him, when he still couldn't tell them where Hamas was, they showed him a spy picture of his wife and said that was time dated and geolocated out of his house, right by his house, and say, we will abduct her and bring her here and rape her in front of you. And then they showed him the same moment a drone photograph of his children's bedroom window, and they said they will send a missile through his or a drone rather through his kid's bedroom window and incinerate them. The amount of mental torture is far worse than the physical torture that this surgeon went through. An accomplished, elegant human being. He was so physically and mentally tortured that anything else that anybody proposes has to be considered as tenable. I myself walked through mass graves and I interviewed witnesses to people being buried in that mass grave. And several witnesses have told me that on one night they saw 2 children dressed in a bright red and a hunter green shirt that were buried alive by an Israeli soldier team, that the bulldozer with a cup full of dirt pushed them into the mass grave, which I walked through. It's at the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Hospital in the back courtyard. They pushed him into the grave and heard the screams of these 2 children and the adult that was with them get muffled as the dirt piled on top of them. They were buried alive. And then there's reports of those same 2 children's skeletons being exhumed, still clad in the nylon green and red shirts, only their hands were tied behind their backs. So any government that would selectively assassinate children any government that would bury children alive, any government that would torture accomplished human beings or any human being sexually and threaten the assassination of their children and the rape of their wife. Any government that would willingly do that, who is a signature to the Geneva Convention and the Rome Accords thereafter, has no limits to what they're willing to do to get what they want. And this has never been, in the 75 years that this genocide has been taking place, this has never been a Muslim versus Jew conflict. It has only been, I want your land to create greater Israel, and I'm willing to kill your children to get it. That's all this is about. And this is only facilitated by the American legislatures, who are prostitutes, and the British legislatures, who continue to be prostitutes to the Israeli lobbies by taking their money and casting their ethics aside by giving them the weapons and the money that's necessary to continue this genocide. And that's why the ceasefire that is pretended to go on, it will not last. Give the Israelis an excuse to cancel the ceasefire, and they will do so. And it is my prediction they will do so. In fact, one of the clauses of the ceasefire is that Hamas has to cancel all hostilities at the discretion of the IDF. It's their determination whether they've canceled all hostilities. And they will never say that they did, and therefore the ceasefire will never genuinely take place. This is just a pause as Netanyahu is trying to develop the greater Israel that he showed to the entire United Nations last year.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mark. This was a painful testimony, really, from Gaza. And now we move to Dr. Frank Romano.
Hello.
Dr. Frank, international human rights activist and member of the July 2025 Gaza Freedom Flotilla, Handhalah. Mr.
Okay.
Romano, Dr. Romano, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear.
Yes. I don't know if you can see me, but can you? Okay. I recently was.
We cannot see you.
You cannot see. I don't know what it says here. I'm trying to get this set up here. Sorry, I didn't. Yeah.
You can go ahead while fixing the.
Okay. It just says end to speak. It said, should I leave and then come back in?
So can we, Dr. Frank?
Yes.
Can you just can you open the camera, or it's still difficult?
It just says end of the. Can I just leave and come back in, because I think it's a problem?
Okay, go ahead. So we will take another speak until you fix this story. Mr. Ahmed Mokhallalati. Dr. Ahmed.
Yeah, with you. Hi, everyone.
Ahmed, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks a lot for arranging this. It's to start with, it's very painful to talk about this. Unfortunately, it's part of the genocide which has been happening live stream for the last 2 years, and it didn't stop. And that's part of the ongoing effect of the genocides happening. I would say it's part of the systemic torture, I would say abuse and disrespect to the Palestinian lives, numbers, stories. I remember when I was in Shifa hospital under the siege, they came and they stolen more than 250 bodies from the hospital. And they've done the same thing around Nasser Hospital in many of the areas which we didn't witness. So any area with grave or areas of dead bodies for the Palestinians, they were taken without paying any efforts or chance just to know which group of these dead bodies are there. So we don't know a lot of, like, more than thousands of dead bodies. We know nothing about them, and that's partly the way they, if I would remind you, a year ago, they've done it the same way. They gave the ICRC a truck full of dead bodies with no sign about who are these ones, which time they were killed, are the chances, even a single chance to know anything about them. At that time, the situation was very critical for the people to come and see their dead bodies, the Ministry of Health at the beginning refused to accept this truck as it has nothing, no information. But then they had to take it because it's Palestinian bodies, and they were buried without any chance to know anything about them. This time we were lucky, a little bit lucky, that we have a ceasefire, a very fragile ceasefire, with some ability to take photos, and they hardly managed to know 30 bodies out of more than 150. So this is part of the systemic situation. And again, they have done this for years and years. We have many Palestinians, we know nothing about them. They were taken into prison. We don't know if they were killed in prisons, killed on the way, or they are still in prisons. And that's, again, when someone tells us the stories which happened in 1948, I could never imagine what does it mean till now that someone would be very happy to hear that her husband is still alive in the prison when one of the prisoners was released recently. And then every one of these, I'm talking about thousands and thousands of Palestinians, they know nothing about their families, beloved ones, and they have to check between the dead bodies, the other prisoners, if they have heard their names or they know anything about them. So it's very obvious that the Israeli didn't pay any efforts to hide the evidence that they were torturing these prisoners or dead bodies. They kept actually the prisoners' tags with the numbers, with the initials of the prisons in all of these bodies. We can tell easily that even the ties were left in their hands and their heads, very tight ties on their eyes, more than 1 centimeter, pressure on the eyes can be seen easily. So they never cared about this because they know they won't be accountable for this. The international community, the international, I would say, players, all the West big countries are supporting them to the maximum, so they don't care about anything. The reflections of these are very massive on families. Someone is waiting for their beloved ones. They know nothing about them. Now they end up with hundreds of these dead bodies where they can't do anything. The big challenge to the Ministry of Health is totally collapsed system. They have no simple tools of knowing anything, no DNA. They can't start digging into these bodies when we don't have capacity to treat patients. So I was speaking this morning to the director of forensic medicine. He said, I got these dozens of bodies with cuts on that one. I don't know if the organs are taken or not. I can't tell you because these have been frozen for more than a year. I don't have the capacity for any operating theater. No one would allow me. I'm really sorry. The maximum, I just can't take photos. I asked, what about CT scan? He said, we hardly managed to get the CT scan for our patients. We don't have the capacity to do anything for these ones. We just take photos and bury them. Unfortunately, we will have to wait for a few days, just if one of the family members would come and see the bodies. But again, they know nothing. They have no tools. They are not allowed to get any DNA machine or anything for that one. So the findings are in the media everywhere. The photos are in the media, and in the coming few days, they will release more and more about this. They just try to collect the evidence from the Ministry of Health part of you. I would just say my testimony about the skin and organ, just stealing. I agree it's hard to have full evidence. We don't have evidence. We can't say 100% they have done this or that. But let me just say a few facts about this. Israel has the biggest human skin bank in the world, with one of the lowest number of population in the world. They still have this biggest skin bank. No one knows anything about the source of this one. 2, as a plastic surgeon, I've been in the industry for a while. Most of the Israeli-based companies and research would come and talk about a lot of research on skin products. We know it's very challenging to get approval for that, but we know that they try it on the prisoners. And one day, a few years ago, one of the companies, by just, when someone says the word that we tried this on one of the prisoners, and they have to pull that, and they have to stop, dealing with that company for that one. I would remind the people what happened in 2000. There was an interview with the head of, I would just say it as it is. It was reports talking about the use of the dead bodies to harvest heart valves, skin, corneas, and bones. And there was an interview with the head of Abu Kabir Forensic Institute in Israel, who has claimed and agreed on that fact that they have used the dead bodies without approval of their families. And then there was a big issue. His name is Yehuda Hess. okay, who said that in 2000. And the report was not, or the interview was not released till 2004 by an American scholar who said that's very controversial, that should not happen. Only by that time, when it became an issue in the media, the Israeli government said, actually, this had happened before. And we promised that this would follow the regulations and the Helsinki agreement, that we have to take consent from the dead bodies, from the families of these bodies or someone. So unless this was released, no one ever would know about this. And that person has said that by mistake, and he was blamed a lot about this thing. Only by that time, the Israeli government said that. So they have a long history of using the dead bodies, parts of the dead bodies, which they already said that they have been using, and they promised they will stop using it, thanks to the Yehuda Hess who released this piece of information. So we don't have capacity to know what's happening, but we have history. We have evidence that they have the highest number of research on these dead bodies. They have the biggest scheme bank and a lot of things which will be released more and more from the Ministry of Health about the torture, about the prisoners with their prisoner tags on their bodies telling their stories. Haaretz said that they have, I think, more than 1,500 bodies in Sidi Tamam prison. Again, they were just put them in a fridge, and they don't care about the details of that for the dead bodies. It's a lot of painful stories, a lot of things to have. But I would say, again, it's our role now to collect the evidence, actually to sit on the side of the Palestinian Ministry of Health, help them to get this evidence the best way out, put pressure on the media, just they allow them to have DNA machines to know whose body are these, and to help them to sort out this big problem for the community, for the hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who know nothing about their beloved ones, families, parents, and kids. So that's our role now. And one day they will be accountable for this one. Thanks to meetings like this, thanks to people's effort who would just try to just say the truth loudly, and our legal bodies, international legal bodies, will be able one day to use this evidence against the ones committing the suicide and this Israeli government and military defense forces or military forces. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed, for your testimony. And just I want to tell everyone that we are sorry for keeping you waiting for that long. We are really anxious to know your insights. And now we are going to take Dr. Frank Romano, international human rights activist and member of the July 2025 Gaza Freedom Flotilla, Handhalah. Dr. Frank.
Yes, hello. I am going to talk about the deteriorating situation of Palestinian prisoners in a prison in which I just was imprisoned. And after that, I'm going to talk about the Palestinian rights in the judicial system, in the court system. First of all, I was part of the Global Samud Flotilla, and I was in Ketziot prison, which is a high security prison, and there are many Palestinians are there. We were beaten as well and deprived of food, but nothing compared to what the Palestinians have suffered in Ketziot prison and in other prisons. Now, the issue of visibility concerning Palestinian detainees is imperative. They, however, Palestinian prisoners are subject to a process of invisibility that contributes to the dehumanization of Palestinians. So we need, together, as a global community, make the Palestinian treatment in prisons visible to the world. Now, the deteriorating conditions have been, there are many testimonies, in particular, with the prisoners that have been just released subject to the ceasefire, and the bodies that have been just released according to the ceasefire. The report by B'Tselem it was called Welcome to Hell, that we know about, in August 2024, contained testimonies of many Palestinians and women, including 21 people from Gaza, Palestinians from Gaza, who were detained in Israeli prisons. They were recently released, but had no trial. The report details torture, cruel, arbitrary punishments, sexual assaults, insults, abuse, deliberate starvation. They were burned, filthy hygiene, sleep deprivation, and confiscating of common or personal belongings and denial of needed medical care. Now, I can witness the people of Samud, we were dumped across the Jordanian border, and they took all our belongings, just like they do with the Palestinians, took all their things, all their personal things. All we had were prison clothes. Now, with respect to the bodies of Palestinians released during the ceasefire, doctors at Nasser Hospital of the southern Gaza city of Khan Yunis, which recently received Palestinian bodies from the International Committee of the Red Cross. They said that there's substantial evidence of the beatings and summary execution on the bodies which were unidentifiable. He said almost all, and I quote, almost all of them had been blindfolded, had been bound up, and they had gunshots between the eyes. Almost all of them had been executed, said Dr. Ahmed Farah. There were also scars and discolored patches of skin on the bodies of these dead Palestinians that were just released. They showed, before they were killed, they showed signs that their bodies had also been abused after they were killed. Now let's talk about the court system, the access of Palestinian prisoners to the courts. International humanitarian law recognizes two categories of individuals during armed conflict. One, civilians, and they're protected under the Fourth Geneva Convention. Two, combatants. They are protected under the Third Geneva Convention. When captured, both groups are guaranteed humane treatment, including notification of detention to their families and eventual release. Let's talk, however, about the Israeli law. Since October 7, 2023, Israel had made several amendments to the law of unlawful combatants. And that law was first enacted in 2002. These changes aim to justify the detention of thousands of Palestinians from the Gaza Strip as part of emergency regulations to their families and eventual release. Now, since October 2023, Israel adopted laws more about unlawful combatants. The term unlawful combatant, what does that mean? It refers to individuals belonging to armed groups who are not recognized as lawful combatants by their adversary. Consequently, Israel argues they are not covered by the Geneva Convention. Israel has used this classification to justify the indefinite detention of thousands of Gazans, deeming them a security threat. Unlawful combatants law it allows for administrative detention without charge where an officer has reasonable grounds to believe the person is an unlawful combatant. Administrative detention can be therefore extended almost indefinitely. However, the law contains a problematic presumption that a member of a force perpetuating hostile acts against Israel and his release would harm state security as long as the hostile acts against the state have not yet ceased. That presumption violates the international humanitarian law, since that state must establish that the person is an individual security threat. Given the rapid increase in the number of detainees we see day in and day out, Israel probably has not even established an individual as a security threat. Now, delaying hearing, part of this law, delaying hearing before a judge 45 days, what does that mean? That qualifies an unlawful combatant doesn't get to see a judge for 45 days. In that period, there's clear likelihood that the Palestinian prisoner will not be informed of the charges against him. International humanitarian law requires a person to be promptly informed of reasons of detention. And it must be specific why that person is detained. To conclude about this section, where detention under law is not properly authorized under international humanitarian law, it can violate the Geneva fourth article, fourth convention, Geneva Convention, the fourth convention, Article 147, constituting a war crime. Arbitrary detention under Article 9 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, a violation, and enforced disappearance, and the crime against humanity of imprisonment. Finally, with respect to a lawyer, they are not allowed to see a lawyer for many days, as much as 75 days. The possibility to delay access to legal representation for 75 days in order for an official, to establish the charges, it's not complying with international humanitarian law. Regular international humanitarian law preserves the right to have regular access to a lawyer. It's essential, important to the right of liberty. Now, what about, finally, international law and accountability? As an occupying power in occupied Palestinian territory, numerous obligations are required under international humanitarian law. Israel, with respect to Gaza, Israel controls the sea, controls the entrances, exits, the skies, and especially after the invasion, Gaza is occupied, and therefore the Geneva Convention, of course, applies even without occupation. It is in complete occupation, even without the invasion of Israeli soldiers in Gaza. We still have the complete occupation of Gaza. Under Article 76 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, relative to the protection of civilian persons in time of war, clearly outlines the right of a protected person when facing detention by an occupying power. The right is the prisoner has the right to remain in occupied territory during all stages of detention. Palestinian prisoners are currently held inside Israel, with the result that their families from the West Bank, families from Gaza, have extremely difficult to visit them. Also, under Article 78 of the Fourth Geneva Convention, occupied powers' obligation to provide adequate medical care and to provide special protection for women and children. Palestinian prisons, as we have stated before and other speakers have stated, are subject to serious medical neglect, as manifested by the case of a 49-year-old man, Mohammed Talal Abdullah, a native of the Jenin refugee camp, who died in the Asaf Harofeh Hospital in Israel on October 19th. He had died of cancer. The deterioration of his health was caused by medical neglect, as announced by the Palestinian Commission of Prisoners' Affairs. The Fourth Geneva Convention contains several provisions providing for due process and administrative justice guarantees that have been clearly violated in light of the above. In conclusion, unlawful combatants law, particularly in its amended form, has become a tool for mass administrative detention, abuse, and denial of justice. Detainees are held indefinitely under conditions that violate international conventions, including the Geneva Convention and the Convention Against Torture. The underlying strategic objective of Israel is clear. The government wants to detain people incommunicado. They want to disappear people without offering them any avenue to challenge their detention. This claimed right to disappear people was tied to an assumption of infallible security, namely that anyone who was detained was a terrorist, and this is completely infallible and erroneous. Now, the solution. Now, what we have, finally, I'm getting to the final conclusion. The solution for unlawful combatant status is to render it void. Unlawful combatant status should be void for the above reasons, is to grant combatant status, not unlawful combatant status, to most people who invaded Israel. Most of them were Palestinian citizens, whether it be in the West Bank or Gaza, who opposed or even attacked Israel. Thus, as combatants, they deserve all the protection afforded to civilians with all the protection of international humanitarian law and the Geneva Convention. Now, what can we do, the community? And this is the final statement. Therefore, the above mistreatment that I've talked about of the prisoners and the lack of access to the courts, etc., should be governed by international humanitarian law and the Geneva Convention. The Fourth Geneva Convention gives rise to the legal obligation of all 194 countries and parties to that convention to adjudicate against Israeli perpetrators of these crimes before the International Criminal Court and before the International Court of Justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Frank Romano. And now we give the floor to Professor Dan Kovalik, American professor and human rights lawyer. Mr. Dan, have the floor.
Yes, thank you for inviting me to this. I believe, as many do, that the Palestinian issue is the moral issue of our times. And obviously, we're all very deeply disturbed by what is happening in occupied Palestine. Again, particularly to prisoners. Now, I think the word prisoners is a misnomer, because I think the thousands of Palestinians languishing in Israeli prisons, for the most part, are hostages as much as the Israelis were hostages in Gaza. That they're treated differently by the press is nothing but a propaganda ploy, in my own view. And in fact, it appears that the hostages in Gaza were treated much better than Palestinians are being treated in prisons. And I think after October 7th, the treatment of Palestinian prisoners is only getting worse. First of all, as has been at least touched upon, rape is now being used by Israel in a systemic way against Palestinian prisoners. We've seen these videos where, in fact, Israeli guards are raping Palestinians on camera, filming themselves doing it. You have the terrible story of Dr. Adnan al-Bursh, who was taken custody during the genocide and who was literally raped to death. And we are hearing more and more incidents of people, from after returning from prison, talking about being raped by human beings and also by dogs. I mean, it's not a happy thing to talk about, but apparently that is happening as well. And in terms of the organ harvesting, I mean, that appears to be a very real thing. I would submit for your review a very good article by the Healthcare Workers for Palestine in Mondaweiss, dated February 22nd, 2025, called A Brief History of Israel, Organ Theft and Trafficking of Palestinian Organs, in which they detail accounts of this going on for at least the last few decades. I think there's enough testimony from people, from relatives of Palestinian prisoners and people and Palestinians killed by the Israelis, of their bodies coming back without organs, including without eyes. Also, admissions by various Israeli physicians admitting to organ theft and trafficking, that we have to believe this is happening. And of course, for Muslims, having a body of a loved one with organs taken out of their bodies prevents, proper burial of their loved ones. And so this is a crime in and of itself against Palestinians, and I think an intentional one at that. And again, even short of these very grisly crimes that are being carried out, it's very clear, again, as we're seeing from prisoners being released as part of this so-called ceasefire, which, by the way, appears to be pretty much over anyway. We see the people were regularly beaten and mistreated in various ways. We, of course, have the case of probably the most famous and most popular Palestinian politician, Marwan Barghouti, who was recently beaten unconscious in Israeli custody. and his family's very worried about whether he'll even survive the custody. And of course, the Israelis will do everything they can to either kill him or destroy him so that he cannot lead Palestine when released. These things are unacceptable. As the gentleman who was on the Flotilla talked about, when you have people from Europe and other countries, when you have a Greta Thunberg, who was once Time Magazine's Person of the Year, when you have them being tortured in Israeli prisons, what that shows is if the Israelis are willing to do that to them, they're willing to do it to anybody. And you have at least several cases of Americans, Palestinian Americans, young Palestinian Americans, teenagers, who have been arrested on the flimsiest of pretexts in the West Bank very recently, and who are being held now without charge, being mistreated. And the U.S. Embassy doesn't even show up to help or question what is happening to them, or even check to see if they're okay. And it's that sort of impunity that is allowing these crimes to happen. Israel's not being held to account for any of these crimes, for some of the worst crimes imaginable. They're not being held to account by the international community, by the countries whose citizens are being mistreated by Israel. And that's what allows this to happen. One of the commentators said, international law forbids all this, and we need international law to prevent this. Well, how's that going to be done exactly? I agree with President Gustavo Petro, who's actually a personal friend of mine, that the only way to deal with this is through some armed military intervention to stop this from happening. The type of humanitarian intervention that the U.S. often calls for in other countries, right? And I think that the UN needs to use the Uniting for Peace resolution to as a end around the Security Council to make that happen. That is the only thing that will stop this. Israel and the United States, which is the key backer of Israel, made it clear international law doesn't apply to them, right? The U.S. just backed out of the Human Rights Council for the second time. So those are my views. It's not a happy situation, but that's the reality. And I hope that the measures needed will be taken to stop these crimes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dan. Now to Lana Abugharbieh. Lana, sorry for keeping you waiting for so long, but we are just we need to listen to your testimony. You have the floor. Go ahead.
Sure. Thank you for letting me speak today. Actually, my first tour in Gaza was January 24 to February 24, and I was with Dr. Ahmed Mokhallalati, so it's a nice surprise to see him here. But yeah, my name is Lana, and I'm an American nurse with almost 20 years of healthcare experience, and I'm among the 1% of the certified emergency nurses in the world. And another interesting fact about myself is that I was the only American present on February 27 of 2025, which was the day that the hundreds of released hostages or torture victims, Palestinian hostages, were released to European Gaza Hospital. But I wanted to speak to this. Since October of 2023, over 21,000 Palestinians have been abducted and detained without charge, some without trial, and like 3,000 of them are children. So among the recently returned, I can go on for hours and tell you all the stories from February 27. But I wanted to bring attention to the recently released Palestinian victims. One of them was actually a friend of mine, a nurse. And so in August, my friend, this nurse, went to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation distribution aid site to get food for his starving family. And he didn't even have his phone on him, but they have drones everywhere and they have his biometrics. So I guess it detected that he was a nurse. So an American soldier snatched him up, beat him up, and then handed him over to the Israeli soldier. And so then he was beaten and he was taken to prison. So all he did was go, he wanted to get aid. That was it. Within the 2 months that he was being held, he was severely tortured. He said that he felt like he got it worse because he was a nurse. For the first 25 days, they had him in solitary confinement. And he was put in stress positions. And there was this one point where he told the soldier, like, I feel like I have nails going through my legs, because he was in this stress position for so long. And so the soldier was like, oh, you feel like you've got nails in your legs? Well, here, let me hammer them. And he starts punching his legs. And then he also, while he was in a stress position, had a baton shoved up his rectum. They had plucked his eyelashes one by one with a tweezer. And then they put an electrical probe on his eyelid and electrocuted him. And with that same electrical probe, they put it on the tip of his penis and like revved it up to the highest voltage and electrocuted him. And since we're talking about the reproductive system, they also gave him a drink 3 times a day. He said morning, afternoon, and evening, he had to drink this drink. And they told him it was to sterilize him so that he could never have children. So I heard Dr. Or no, I think it was Dr. Ahmed Mokhallalati. Somebody had mentioned something about running experiments, and yes, like they are running clinical trials on these victims. So I can go on and on about the beatings and the torture, but also another thing they did was they starved him. So he would get like 3 tablespoons of either chickpeas or rice with toilet water, maybe every other day. Sometimes they would make him go 2 days without food. He had lost 10 kilos within 2 months. So it was just brutal. It was brutal. And to top it all off, do you want to know what his charge was? His charge was for supposedly for caring for the Israeli prisoners of war. Supposedly they were brought to this hospital and he cared for them, which never happened. There's no evidence. There's like nothing, no witnesses, nothing. And he actually had a trial date and they sentenced him to life in prison for this. Rather than, let's just hypothetically say, let's pretend that did happen, right? Rather than saying, thank you for treating our people, you sentence him to life in prison. By the grace of God, like 6 hours before the bus left with the released hostages, his name somehow made it on the list because they know he's not, he didn't do that. So these people are not numbers. They are fathers, they are brothers, they are uncles, they are teachers, they're healthcare workers, they're nurses. Like, they're members of the community. They're obviously not Hamas, because if they were, they wouldn't have been released, all these men, right? I mean, but Israel built this system on dehumanizing Palestinians. When they spoke with me, the ones on February 27 that I spoke with, I mean, some of them were shaking, some of them were crying, some of them were so shook that they couldn't even speak. And some of them couldn't even look up at me from humiliation and embarrassment from what they had gone through. And that's all of that was done to them was meant to embarrass them, to break them, as said on their uniforms. And they were wearing wristbands on February 27. All of their sweatshirts on the back of it said, quote unquote, in Arabic, it said, but translated to English, it said, I pursue my enemies, I catch them, and I do not return them until I have destroyed them. They had that around their wrists and on the back of their sweatshirts, each and every one of them. And truthfully, Israel went through with their promise. They definitely destroyed them, physically, mentally, emotionally destroyed them. And I made it a point to ask each and every one of them that I spoke with where they were at the time that they were taken. And many of them were taken from the hospital. Others were taken from, like, they were in their homes or in their tents, and like a drone overhead had told them that they had to exit with their hands out up in the air. So that's how they were also taken. And as a nurse, I can treat wounds, no problem, but it's the invisible wounds that's difficult to treat. So the distant eyes, the lost look, the complete mistrust in the world, and the feeling of failure in the world, that's something you can't treat. So it's harder. Torture, medical neglect, humiliation, it's not security measures, it's crimes. And medical care is not a privilege, it's a right. So we need more than thoughts and prayers. We need transparency. We need medical access. We need international oversight. We need more action than what we're doing now. These are obligations under international humanitarian law. And right now there are no investigations. There are no emergency resolutions. There's no outrage from those who claim to stand for human rights. And we can't stay silent. I won't stay silent. I know I will not turn away. I will tell their stories over and over and over and over until the world listens and does something about it. And that's
Thanks
my
a lot,
story.
Lana, for this testimony about what was happening on the ground in Gaza and inside Israeli prisons. And before I put an end to this webinar, is there anyone who wants to make a comment in 1 minute or less? So, thank you very much. And at the end of this valuable webinar, I would like to thank everyone who has taken part in it, either by speaking, commenting, or listening. Thank you very much for your precious time and input. And goodbye.
Free Palestine.
Free Palestine.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much. Thank you.
Thank you.